Okay, my name is Jessica Barranco, and I am currently here at UAS, and I'm working on my Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Resources. And I recently wrote a term paper in environmental sociology, and it's called Actualizing Ecofeminism in Society, an approach to current environmental issues. Capitalist societies are typically guided by incessant increases in profits in the market and become culprits for the continuous exploitation of natural resources and the subordination of women. Ecofeminist views claim that there is a connection between the exploitation of natural resources and women, which creates unsustainable male-female relationships within society and man-nature structures within the production process. Within ecofeminism, essentialist and non-essentialist views are at odds in explaining these unsustainable relationships. The essentialist approach argues that women are naturally closer to nature because of their familiarity with the earth, while men are naturally predisposed to dominate women and nature. Non-essentialist theory claims that women have socially constructed roles due to male-dominated societies. This forces women to mediate between men and nature. I will evaluate these theories in order to approach environmental exploitation within capitalist societies. I'm using Mary Mellor and Vinanda Shiva in order to set a foundation for these opposing ecofeminist theories, essentialist and non-essentialist viewpoints, respectively. They do not need to exist at odds within society. They can be evaluated and reworked to form sustainable methods of change. In order to actualize this ecofeminism, it is important to apply ethics to all members of society in order to encompass each individual and hold them responsible for their role within the environment. By obligating members of society to the environment, humanity can demand change within this capitalist society and demand sustainability and unification of social as well as environmental problems created from the exploitation of women and nature. Mary Mellor argues that society has historically identified female activities as socially constructed roles imposed upon women in male-dominated societies. Because women have been placed in a role of caregiver and nurturer, they are expected to perform these tasks without pay and without the acknowledgement that these tasks are in fact labor. Capitalist societies further exploit women by creating a mediator role for women between men and nature. Men are able to hyper-exploit nature to increase profits. Women do not have the opportunity in these societies to achieve equality with men because they are subjected to these natural forms of unpaid labor. The same is true for nature, in that it is constantly exploited by men and is not allowed time to replenish itself from the exploitation set upon it. As society seeks to manage and exploit nature, consequences may arise long after the profits have been made and spent. Nature will continue in existence regardless of this fact. Society must be aware of nature and embrace a more nature-aware ontology, a dynamic and interactive ecological process. Society cannot fully understand the impacts of the exploitation of nature, nor can it predict the consequences of that exploitation. Vinanda Shiva, she's an essentialist. She argues through an essentialist perception that women are naturally closer to nature because of their familiarity with the earth and natural processes such as childbearing and nurturing roles as mothers. Women are fundamentally closer to the earth despite social factors. Men are naturally predisposed to dominate women and therefore nature. Shiva assumes that development and industrialization of third world countries would create a higher standard of living and improved well-being. By introducing private ownership, capital creates a personal obligation to the property or to that nature. The ideology of development declares subsistence economies to be exploited and dominated because they neither participate overwhelmingly in the market economy nor consume commodities produced for and distributed through the market. These cultures are created to be poor by the standard of moving profit and commodities through the market to be consumed. People may have sufficient sustenance in terms of local food and other necessary goods, but because they are not participating in the capitalist market, they cannot obtain a higher status. This creates a need to participate in this type of economy. She claims that the most destructive people on the planet are the first world men because they consume the most natural resources. Quote, "The poor, the weak are a surplus population putting an unnecessary burden on the planet's resources. This view and the responses and strategies that emerge from it totally ignore the fact that the greatest pressure on the Earth's resources is not from large numbers of poor people, but from a small number of the world's ever-consuming elite. Society must address toxic and nuclear hazards, food and nutrition inadequacies, water shortages, and survival strategies such as education, etc. These topics add to the realization that society must change the way it treats women and its constant disregard for future generations." In response to Shiva, this focus on women's proximity to nature can lead to burdening women with cleaning up the environment. If it's accepted that women are closer to nature, they can further be subjected to domination and exploitation by men within society. If only women are close to the environment, it would be argued that it is their responsibility to care and tend to its problems. This could be dangerous, leading men to further destroy natural resources with no regard for its consequences. So how can we implement an ethical and assertive method of change? This is my question. The domination of women within society is a social issue that must be addressed and reconstructed in order to change the exploitation of the environment. This is possible by accepting this exploitation as historical phenomena that has the ability to change and progress through time. Since they are socially constructed, they can be socially changed. They are not, therefore, essential. This fundamental agreement must be accepted in order to change society from within. So 2 points are necessary for change. The first, the planet must be at extreme deprivation in order to show unquestionable response and exploitation. Secondly, those who are subject to social and environmental justice must rebel against the exploitative labor, boycott commodities that promote further degradation, and reclaim land that has been stripped from them. This can be advantageous to move towards realizing the social aspects of individuals within society, as this will help create an ethical goal for people to progress as social beings. Mediation between nature and men must be redirected to incorporate men's own relationship with nature. Both men and women can benefit from performing nurturing work, learning to understand natural processes, and knowing nature's limits. So let's use one environmental exploitation. The Green Revolution is taking place in India. This ecological issue began with a scientific answer to malnourishment and overpopulation. By providing genetically modified seeds that would have the potential to feed the country, the short-term answer created success and even allowed India to produce enough food to export their goods. But after 40 years, there have been dramatic consequences to India's agriculture and their natural resources. According to a report by NPR in 2009, quote, "The government told farmers to start growing miracle high-yield seeds. It said, there's a catch. You can't grow these special seeds just with rainfall. You're going to have to irrigate from now on. The groundwater under these fields has been sinking as much as 3 feet every year. If farmers don't make dramatic changes in the way they farm, India could become like the Dust Bowl in the United States in the 1930s. Unfortunately, the government in India is not doing anything to prevent degradation, exploitation, or the imminent threat of agricultural collapse. The farmers in India believe that science will have the answers and can invent genetically modified seeds that don't need so much water. The environment is at a critical point where it can no longer sustain these farming tactics and developments, and the poor people are desperate for change. So it's necessary to change the mentality within that system. People need to realize the limits of the environment, first and foremost. The exploited farmers cannot keep up with development, and the economical degradation must campaign for a new sustainable agricultural system. This tactic involves both genders. A sustainable agricultural system must address the needs of all dependent upon it, not just the men who are profiting from it. In other societies, there may be specific problems of exploitation occurring, but it is necessary, regardless, to demand change within profit and consumption-driven societies around the world. To actualize ecofeminism in society, it is important to apply ethics to all members of that society, in order to encompass each individual and hold every class and gender responsible for its role within the environment. By obligating members of society to the environment, humanity may create a better opportunity to demand sustainability from all countries around the world. This unification of ideas may help to address specific environmental and social problems that have taken rise due to the industrialization and constant exploitation of women and nature. An exploited society must address current issues and work within itself to physically realize a possible change that is sustainable. Thanks. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer any or address any. And also, with this paper, I just wanted to announce I've been accepted to present this paper in a conference in Canada in October. It's called Under Western Skies, and Vinanda Shiva, one of the theorists that I brought up, is actually going to be there. So I'm really excited.
So, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the conference. And this was Jessica's first time ever presenting a paper, and she was nervous. And I said, "No, I know you'll do a great job," and I think she did.
Thank you. So if anybody has any questions, I know that this didn't necessarily have anything to do with specific animals or specific types of wilderness, but I'm looking to hopefully research and continue my research in looking at societies and how their relationships with nature and with environment can actually become sustainable. So if there's no questions, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so we have Vandana Shiva with the essentialist position, and Mary Mellor with a non-essentialist position. Could you kind of say which one do you think is more credible, the essentialist or the non-essentialist?
Well, because they're so different, the point of this paper was to kind of take both ideas and somehow find a mesh between the two ideologies. So Vinanda Shiva talks about the current events in some of the third world countries or underdeveloped countries, which create a very unique system which can be critical for change, whereas Mary Mellor talks about social construction, and so it's not biologically decided that you're going to be close to nature. And so by combining these two, we can take these critical problems that are going on in underdeveloped countries and maybe through social change actually address them and maybe create solutions that might be healthier and more sustainable for the long term.
So with Meller, what does she say? There's hope for first world guys. What can we do to behave less? What can we do to be closer to nature, maybe less destructive?
Well, I talked a little bit about that, or maybe I didn't. I can't remember now. But so Mary Mellor talks about men actually participating in activities that we might actually see as feminine. So of course they can't actually give birth to any children or anything, but maybe taking part in teaching children or playing with them, or even doing household work and things that we might associate as feminine tasks. And that might actually help them to create a better relationship with nature. So that might save them. You have a question?
Oh, here, let me give you the mic so they can hear you.
In the year 2010, don't we have a common denominator at this point? Is there such a rigid separation of genders?
Well, I'm hopefully not just addressing political issues and divisions among first world countries. Like we have a pretty balanced system here in the United States, if you want to say that, where women might be more equal to men in their roles, but in other countries, the systems might not be as equal. So there's always a constant. I don't know how to describe it, but we're always at odds with each other. So we're always working on it. It's a social thing that we always have to be addressing.
There are some third world countries, Senegal, for example, where you have a matriarchal society.
Right, that's true. And so in this paper, I'm not assuming that all countries fit into this exact system that I set up here, but it's also an attempt to look at what we have now, what we're used to here in the States, and maybe address some issues that we might be faced with in similar countries or similar political places. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Do you happen to know the prevalence of those superseeds in our food source here in the United States?
No, I haven't researched that specifically, but I'm sure that there are other people talking about that. Sorry.
I believe if you look at certain crops in the United States, about 80 to 90% are genetically modified. Corn and soybeans are almost entirely GM at this point.
Thank you, Brittany.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
This probably doesn't fit your presentation, but the other questions made me wonder the gender of farmers and what gender might grow sustainable crops without chemicals, and what gender might be more likely to be factory farming. It's just an interesting question. I know that's not what you wrote about, but
No, that's fine. And actually, that question would be really relevant because in one portion of my paper, I talked about being cautious of claiming that women might be the answer to these environmental problems. So we want to be cautious by saying, or by not saying, that women might be the ultimate farmer because they understand the environment. What we actually need is a meshing of both genders and understanding a more sustainable perspective versus saying, yes, we need a male, or yes, we need a female farmer.
Excellent. I just have actually a quick comment that I think it's important not to overstate the degree of equality we've achieved in the first world. And so another ecofeminist, Maria Rosa Del Costa, has written that if we look at women, say within the United States or Western Europe, what we've done is we've placed a double burden on them. So we say, well, we want you to do the care of producing, so she's actually an eco-Marxist feminist, so a bunch of hyphens in there, but she's saying the women have always had to do the labor of producing and reproducing the labor force. So essentially the backbone of capitalism depends on women doing unpaid labor, of having children, and raising them, and that the whole economy would collapse if they didn't do that, and it's a service they provide for free. But then we've said, not only do we expect you to do that, we've tacitly said, we also want you to go out and do paid labor as well. And so that there's a lot of data, maybe Brittany's more familiar with this than I am, but something like if women have children and they're working 40 hours a week, they might put in another 40 hours a week with childcare, and that men who have children maybe 20 or 25. And so that women are deprived of the time to get more education in cases, or the time to work overtime at work because of doing the child care. And so, well, that explains, well, this other just economist, and Crittenden, is saying, well, if you want to explain a lot of the wage gap between men and women, a lot of that is that unequal division of domestic labor. So back to Della Costa, what she says is that women are actually engaged, they've gone on strike in the first world. They're saying, no, we're going to either have no kids or fewer children, right? So you look at some place like Japan or Italy, where you have the negative birth rate, they're saying, no, we're not going to do all of this free labor for you folks. So that's kind of another perspective. So I don't want to be too quick to say, well, we've got this equality going. But anyhow. Excellent job. Excellent job.
Thanks, everyone.